Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are. The Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. I was thinking about paranormal weather as of time of recording, I should say. I was looking out the window. I thought it was like, you know, like those scenes in a movie where you're in the horse-drawn carriage and you're heading up to Dracula's Transylvania castle for the first time. It's a bit like that. It's kind of a bit menacing, but it's not doing much, but it's full of potential danger.
I've just driven through a powerful downpour.
We really appreciate all the downloads we get. We don't just drive through them. Yes, well, there you go. So maybe that means the Dracula fear has passed.
So vampirous weather.
Vampirous weather, I think, yes.
I'll tell you what it reminded me of was the Kate Bush video, Cloud Busting.
Ah, yeah, love that video.
Yeah.
Love that song as well. Oh,
yeah, target reference.
Yeah.
Target audience reference.
Doesn't matter, it's still genius. Patreon, we have a new Patreon. Ross Evans, thank you very much for joining our Patreon program. Really appreciate it. A big thank you to you and all the other Patreons out there. As we said, it really helps us, helps support us and do what we do. If you fancy becoming a Patreon, go to patreon.com/TQMpod. You'll get early access to our podcast. When we finished editing them, we put them up there first, ad-free, and we do other little bits and pieces as well, but you know, mainly it's like supporting us and helping us do what we do. So thank you, Ross, and everyone else.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah, a good example of that was all the kit we used in the Halloween special, and getting everyone to do that thing cost a lot of money. You all helped, you made it work. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
So this week's episode, it's a little bit harrowing to start off with, I'm afraid. It's the only way of getting into it. Right. And there's no nice way of getting into it, but it is paranormal.
Is it worth if you're listening in the car or in the kitchen with kids, you might want to bear that in mind. Is it that level?
They'll learn about this in history.
Okay.
And it's okay. We do get onto, it's not necessarily a lighter topic, but we don't delve around in this forever. But this story starts with the Cambodian genocide,
right? Which
is why I said it's a little bit dark. And I don't know if wherever in the world you're from, whether you learned about this at school. I certainly did. We had to watch The Killing Fields as part of our humanities lesson. You probably did.
Yeah.
But just in case you didn't know, it was the death of 3 million people in Cambodia from 1976 to 1978, carried out by the Khmer Rouge, which was the government under Pol Pot, who was basically a dictator. And it happened, and this is very important to the story, immediately after World War II, when the Americans and the French fought wars against communism in Korea and Vietnam. Cambodia became independent in 1953 when French Indochina collapsed under the assault of Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh Communist Army. This is a bit of a history lesson. It's quite. I think I put in more detail than I remembered.
I feel like I should be taking notes.
Yeah. Well,
there's not a test at the end, is there?
There isn't a test. No.
Right.
But I just got carried away because this sort of sets the scene for how horrific this is and why what happened.
Well, it's major, dark part in human history as well, isn't it?
It is. So we sort of we go forward, and there's this new regime appears in Cambodia, and as I say, it's under the Khmer Rouge, and they start destroying evidence of Western influence. They empty cities, force marching the urban population into the countryside to basically start some kind of, it's comic book communism, really. It's very ill thought out. It's like going back to they reset the clocks. They literally do reset the dates, and they go back to agrarian farming.
Okay, yeah.
And the Khmer Rouge also specialised in persecuting and killing minorities, including and very specifically ethnic Chinese, in really large numbers.
Right.
And they also targeted the Chan Muslims and anyone who could be remotely described as intellectuals. Sadly, that meant anyone who was wearing spectacles or who could speak a foreign language.
Cool. Well, I've only got one out of the two, so
Yeah.
that's the spectacles, by the way.
Oh, oui, monsieur. Oh, God, I've got both. By November 78, when Vietnam invaded and put an end to Khmer Rouge's excess, at least 1.25 million had been killed, and as many as 3 million Cambodians had died as a result of the Khmer Rouge action. Wow. Cambodia's population had only been 7.5 million. Oh. Now,
wow.
That what you might say has that got to do with
a paranormal podcast?
Yes.
What has that got to do with a paranormal podcast?
In 1984, Wes Craven introduced the world to one of the most iconic horror films of all time, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
You were going to segue from the Khmer Rouge to A Nightmare on Elm Street?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
His creation of Freddy Krueger as a demon who kills teens in their dreams was heinous, terrifying, and literally ripped from the headlines because Craven found inspiration for the landmark horror movie through an article that was published in the LA Times. This article recounted the story of a refugee child from the Cambodian genocide who was terrified to sleep for fear he would be attacked in his dreams and never wake up.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, dozens of Southeastern Asian refugees in America did die of unknown reasons in their sleep during the 1980s.
Wow.
The mysterious deaths, and this is what Craven had read about,
right,
were usually among young men in their 20s and 30s and I do apologise, it's very important that, considering the nature of this matter, I'm not butchering this on purpose, but Hmong ethnic group, I think it's Hmong, I have checked online, I can't find a pronunciation, but I think it is Hmong ethnic group, and it affected a large enough segment of this population to alarm public health experts. This minority group had been persecuted in Laos after they were recruited by the CIA to fight North Vietnamese soldiers during the Vietnam War, and more than 30,000 Hmong soldiers helped the US fight communism in the Northern Highlands where they lived, but died at a rate of 10 times the number of their American counterparts. So during battle, they suffered very, very heavy losses.
Right.
And that is likely attributed to basically lack of training, and also, sadly, some of them were definitely put in places they shouldn't have been put in.
Right, so kind of slightly used as fodder in a way.
A little bit. I mean, no historians necessarily that I have found are pointing the finger in that direction, but that is certainly sort of the through line.
It's a thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the survivors of the war fled their homes after the war to become refugees in Thailand or the US. It sounds like that was like a nice thing, but I found a quote from an associate professor at UC Berkeley who wrote a book called The Southeast Asian Migration, People on the Move in Search of Work. And he says this was a forced migration under the most trying of circumstances. So it wasn't nice.
Right.
These are people who had endured a great deal and had been subjected to a great deal. These refugees in the US suffered from high rates of poverty, and soon a mysterious ailment seemed to befall them. Like Freddy Krueger's targets, many of the afflicted were teenagers and young men. And this sparked headlines. There's a lot more than you think. Mysterious fatal malady striking Hmong men, and night deaths of Asian men unexplained, ran the LA Times article again and again.
I imagine a lot of them were also suffering from extreme trauma and maybe PTSD as well.
Well, this is exactly what we come on to. And I've got some scientific papers. Everybody hit the scientific paper alert alarm.
Yes! We're the only podcast where we go, we found a scientific paper. Yes!
Well, I think particularly when we're talking about difficult subjects, I think it adds a level of credence to what we're discussing here.
Yeah, definitely.
In one 1981 article, it describes the scene of a Laotian refugee who located to the US from a refugee camp in Thailand with his family. But shortly after settling in his new country, 47-year-old Yong Leng Tao died in his sleep with his wife beside him. He was the fourth Hmong man to die while sleeping in 9 months, and the third nocturnal death recorded since 1978 in the same ethnic group. Investigators could find no medical explanation for the deaths, but many community members attributed the deaths to, for example, chemical nerve agents that the refugee soldiers of the Vietnam War would have been exposed to.
Right. So
That's just one of the things.
one of the theories is an after effect of something they came across, chemical weapons in the war.
Well, that's what they thought. The doctors said they didn't support that theory.
Okay. Can I just, maybe you get onto this, but can I ask a question at this point? That number of kind of unexplained deaths in sleep, I'm assuming that is statistically significant compared to other groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Larry Dr. Larry Newman. No.
That's one of the easiest ones we've ever had.
Dr. Larry Lumen. That's why it's difficult.
Ah, yeah. It's a tongue twister.
Larry Lumen. Dr. Larry Lumen said nerve gas just doesn't act that way. There's no evidence of it. And if it was nerve gas, why does it only affect males and why only during the night?
Right.
This fatal ailment was later classified, and you will probably have heard this term, as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNS. Have you heard about this?
You know what? I haven't. No.
Ah, okay. Well, it's been investigated by the Centre of Disease Control at length. The wave of SUNS deaths among Southeastern Asians, particularly the Hmong men, is still, however, unexplained. Now, of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But this idea of you give something a name, so sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome.
Yeah.
What is that really words for? That's we don't know what happened.
Yeah.
It's basically it could have been a heart attack. It could have been something else, and that leads you down again the Wes Craven route. If you die in your sleep, can you really die?
Right.
It's one of those urban legends that we sort of have heard about and gets passed around the playground. Do you remember this?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
It's like my favourite one was Marilyn Manson played Paul in The Wonder Years. That's a very American reference, but I do remember being told this.
Right.
Not true. The dying in your dreams rumour persisted and persists for several reasons. In the past, it persisted because there was no internet. That's a very big part of it.
Right.
But it's because it's also impossible to fact check. The fact that SUNS exists also sort of shows it's impossible to fact check.
Yeah.
Dreams are nebulous. This is a quote from a doctor. Dreams are nebulous and fleeting. And after all, if someone did die as a result of dying in their dream, how would we ever know? See, that's the terrifying thing about Freddy Krueger, isn't it? Nobody really knows that they're being murdered.
Right.
There are, however, a couple of things that suggest that there might be deadly dreams. First, it is possible, although unlikely, for a person to be scared to death. When we're frightened, the body flings itself into a fight or flight mode, which is triggered by a flood of adrenaline. The heart beats faster and blood flow is rerouted to major muscle groups. We know this. And those who are predisposed to anxiety and getting these panics, as you would have been if you had been in such a terrible situation as these young men, the influx of adrenaline can cause a cardiac event which can lead to death. Right. Adrenaline, it says here, is useful, but it can be toxic in large amounts, and when taken in large amounts consistently, can cause damage to the heart, lung, liver, and kidneys. And if enough adrenaline is pumped in, the heart just keeps contracting and you get arrhythmia and die. Well, that is one doctor's opinion.
Yeah.
It is not recommended. That is not what the NHS says. I will tell you
You did check that out.
I did check that out. The NHS says you can't die of that.
Oh, that's interesting in itself. But I mean, in a way, it might make sense because I know from there's that theory, isn't there, about panic attacks where it's like the last 1% of adrenaline that takes you over the edge into a full panic attack. And actually, you know, if you do have mechanisms in place like your breathing and all that kind of stuff, actually you only have to lower your adrenaline levels by 1 or 2% to take yourself out of that zone. Do you know what I mean? Well, what I was thinking is if you're in asleep and in a dream,
You can't do that.
you've got, you don't dream, this is what I need to do to I need to control my breathing or calm down or whatever. You've got no control over that. So,
No.
so I'm not saying that's a medical thing. I'm just saying I can see why it might be a possibility.
I can. So the second thing to consider is where SUNS comes in again.
Yeah.
According to a paper in the Journal of the American Heart Association, refugees exhibited high levels of depression and anxiety in the early years after relocating to the United States. That sounds plausible.
Yeah.
Those rates dropped off in subsequent years. That anxiety could have triggered night terrors leading to cardiac events, which ultimately claimed the lives of vulnerable individuals. It is unclear, and in fact unknowable, if reported SUNS cases were the result of dreams in which the individual died. But there is some correlation between parasomnia, sleep disorders, nothing to do with the paranormal, like night terrors, and the sudden onset of death during sleep. So,
But that would also suggest that any group of people under that kind of stress would have a higher proportion of deaths in their sleep.
and that is the main argument against it, yes. That is the main argument.
Because anybody involved in, a war situation, I mean, maybe they don't monitor that kind of thing, but there must be statistics to go either a specific group of people or people experiencing trauma of a war or a natural disaster, sleep death rates go up, right? But that doesn't seem to be necessarily proved.
No, and also there is no explanation as to why it's only young men.
Right.
Because there were older men there. They hadn't necessarily taken part in fighting, but they had taken part.
Yeah.
So it's still very unsatisfactory.
Although, depending on how old they are, I guess from a registering the death point of view, you might not pay so much attention to an older person dying in their sleep because it's more of a expected outcome.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So what I did, I went back to some source material, and there's a couple of scientific papers I want to quote from here because...
Have they got good titles?
Right. Red lorry, yellow lorry.
Hold on, clear that.
Hang on, I'm going to even take an inhaler.
Okay.
Right. Okay, I think I'm ready. There's one word in here which I'm going to definitely trip over.
Fine.
Dreams of the dead amongst Canadian refugees, frequency, phenomenology, and relationship to complicated grief and post-traumatic stress disorder. I did it.
Oh, it's a classic. You delivered that well.
Thank you very much.
That is a classic academic paper title.
Hinton, Field, Nickerson, Bryant, and Simmons are the people you're after if you want to look this up.
Yep. Et al.
Yes, et al. The authors investigated the importance of dreams of the deceased in experiencing of prolonged grief, they call it PG, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD,
Right.
among Canadian refugees who survived the Pol Pot genocide. Such dreams were frequent in the last month of what they mean in the last month is of their analysis.
Yep.
52% of those surveyed, and most often involved a relative who had died in the Pol Pot period. And it says past month frequency has correlated with PG severity. So what they're talking about there is how long the grief lasts within somebody's basically dreams reinforcing grief,
Yep.
and therefore contributing significantly to a pattern of anxiety, and what they then go on to argue is PTSD,
Yep.
and PTSD then leads to all of these other health complications.
Right.
So that's sort of that is one element of it, and so that whole piece just argues that the dreams are more frequent amongst these people who've seen it. The people in there are not abstract; they're real relatives, and basically they were very traumatized and dream about it, but they come to no conclusion about their death.
So this group, because of the trauma and potentially post-traumatic stress that they're experiencing, are more likely to have nightmares, have them more often, maybe even more extreme.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then there's another paper which kind of acts as a nice follow-up to it. Normal grief and complicated bereavement amongst traumatized Cambodian refugees, cultural context and the central role of dreams of the dead.
That's a good one too.
Yes. Nickerson and Hinton are in there again. This article profiles, I'm quoting here from the abstract, this article profiles bereavement amongst traumatized Cambodian refugees and explores the validity of a model of how grief and PTSD interact in this group to form a unique bereavement ontology, a model in which dreams of the dead play a crucial role. Several studies were conducted in a psychiatric clinic treating Cambodian refugees who survived the Pol Pot genocide. Right. Key findings include that Pol Pot deaths were made even more deeply disturbing owing to cultural ideas about bad death and the consequence of not performing mortuary rites. The pained recall of the dead in the last month was common and usually caused great and emotional somniac distress. That severity of pained recall of the dead was strongly associated with PTSD. That pained recall was often very often triggered by dreaming about the dead, usually of someone who died in the Pol Pot regime, and that Cambodians have a complex system of interpretation of dreams of the deceased that frequently cause those dreams to give rise to great distress. So that sort of those words manage to say the same thing forwards and backwards, but basically you get where I'm coming from. This particular cultural group, they assign a lot of stay in what is happening in their dream state, and this belief that you've got dreams, there is an implication that if you dream about the dead, you can die in your sleep, and then other people start doing it, and so that starts feeding, reinforcing it. Yeah.
So you've got this scenario where there's this cultural importance of dreams. Full stop. There's what you said. I was interested in what you said in that quote in terms of a bad death being a cultural thing. I don't know if that's a religious or a paranormal belief system.
It's a religious thing, yeah.
So if you and then a belief that you can die in your sleep, you put all those three together, it kind of amps it up. Is that's kind of what I was thinking?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly right. So that's sort of like the psychological side of it. But what was actually happening to the people? This guy, Kirshner, is an associate professor of pathology at the University of Chicago. He undertook a systematic study of the problem. His results, based on data from the Federal Centers for Disease Control and autopsies of 18 night terror victims, were reported to the Journal of American Medical Association. The victims had much in common. First and foremost, that nothing seemed to be wrong with them before they suddenly died.
Can I just clarify, when you say victims, dead victims, or just...
Yeah, so people who died with sons or whatever we call it.
Not just afflicted with bad dreams, they actually died.
They actually died.
Yeah.
These were all healthy men with no previous symptoms. The average age was 33. The situation is almost always the same. It only occurs in men, and it only occurs in their sleep. The report is they cry out and then die, or are found dead the next morning. Standard autopsies revealed very little about the deaths, other than that they were caused by a sudden heart stoppage. Such an occurrence in Asians is mystifying, since their rate of ordinary cardiac disease and malfunction are extraordinarily low, primarily due to their low-fat diet. Yeah. But then an anomaly turns up. Detailed examinations of the victims' hearts performed by Mr. I'm going to call him Dr. Eckner because I can't do his first name, of the University of Illinois College of Medicine, turned up something strange. All of the 18 hearts were slightly enlarged, and 17 showed defects in their conduction system, which is an array of fibres that carries the electrical impulses from the brain. These fibres were frayed and curled, as if their hearts had just shorted out. It's Kirshner's theory that something happened at night, perhaps a random electronic discharge, and yes, perhaps it was a nightmare that overloaded these defective hearts, causing these sudden deaths. Right. This makes the nightmare death all the more curious, since studies of whites who die suddenly has not shown the same defect.
Wow.
Right. That was what got me interested in this whole thing.
So this heart, the way he's described it, that makes a direct connection with dreams in a way. Activity of the brain during dreams that causes this potentially causes this reaction? Is that the is he joining those dots in a way?
Well, he's saying that it's very strange that 17 out of these 18 are exhibiting these symptoms.
Yeah,
they all died from this fact. Other people who have died of sons, who are very much less in their numbers, you know, the white people they've examined, they don't have this defect.
Wow.
So he is sort of postulating, with this defect, it is possible for a dream to kill you.
Right. Wow.
Not quite Freddy Krueger style, but Freddy Krueger style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
wow,
that was sort of like, gosh, okay. And then, so like you, I was interested in, so are there wider cultural things that inform, like you said, the idea that it was a bad death, or and I couldn't help thinking somewhere along the line, people are thinking paranormal. They weren't necessarily thinking paranormal, but some common themes did come up. So we've spoken about it before: the night terrors, paralysis,
right,
and paralysis demons. You've had sleep paralysis.
I have. Yes, yeah, classic. It was a classic thing, and we've talked about it on the podcast quite a lot, and I know it is a kind of natural neurological thing, often stress related, but it does still fascinate me that I and other people see the same things. Now, there may be a logical explanation for that. You know, there's the old hag or the kind of monk or whatever, but that's the bit of it that fascinates me. Yeah.
So for people who don't know, the idea is that you wake up and you can't move, but you think you're conscious.
Yeah.
And there's a vengeful spirit that is trying to suffocate you. So it's often called the old hag because it's a woman, an old hag that sits on you. I found out bizarrely in Brazilian folklore, the demon has a name. It's called Pisadera. A crone with long fingernails who lurks on rooftops at night, then walks on the chests of people who sleep belly up or on a full stomach. Interestingly enough, that's a good fact, because if you sleep on your stomach, you tend not to get sleep paralysis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. So that's really interesting. That's fascinating. Because if you go with the scientific explanation, take the paranormal out of it, it's like this. I guess the easiest way to describe it is a slight misfiring in the brain that causes it. So you're asleep, but then you wake, but the bit that deparalyzes you doesn't kick in, and your subconscious is still in play. So you're dreaming. It's an awake dream where you can't move, but you would think it wouldn't matter which way up you were lying, wouldn't it?
I think it's because when I was looking at it, I mean, it was sort of too much medical detail for this discussion, but the idea is that you paralyse yourself so you don't act out your dreams.
Yeah.
It's the sort of the same mechanism that goes wrong when you sleepwalk.
Yeah.
If that mechanism doesn't get turned off when you awake, this is when you get sleep paralysis. That mechanism is easier for your body to turn back on again if you sleep on your stomach.
Right, you're because I know from when I had it, I started to consciously try and move my limbs, and as I did that, I kind of got out of it. So yeah, maybe there's something about being in that position. Maybe you are paralysed, but you can get out of the paralysis.
Maybe,
quicker.
yeah. Oh, apparently, the other way of solving it is lucid dreaming, learning how to lucid dream.
Right.
Although I don't for sure.
Yeah.
That seems like too much work. I'm asleep, man.
Yeah.
But this article, which sort of goes on about these demons, and we sort of know what they are. They're all the same sort of thing. It says, are these demons real? And obviously the initial answer is, well, no. But then I came across, there was a sublink to a brilliant article that I found. Well, it's a paper. Prevalence rates of the incubus phenomena, a systematic review and meta-analysis. We've come across the incubus before.
I think I've come across... This is so geeky. I think I've come across that paper before.
Oh, my goodness. We're beginning to find our own papers again. Well, not our own papers, but each other's papers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This one's from the Department of Psychology at the University in the Netherlands. the rest of the bit in the middle of that sentence, you just have to wake up your own mind.
I'm sure I got it right when I used it.
Fine. It's the University of Groningen in Groningen.
Yeah, I have come across this paper before. That's weird.
Oh, that is so odd. So this paper says the incubus phenomena is a paroxysmal sleep-related disorder characterised by compound hallucinations experienced during brief phases of apparent wakefulness. The condition has an almost stereotypical presentation characterised by an hallucination that exerts pressure on the thorax, meanwhile carrying out aggressive sexual acts. Now, it's kind of like sleep paralysis with some other dodgy stuff going on.
I didn't get that one.
But the point about this is that those sexual things can elicit a real reaction from the body. You can imagine what the real reactions are.
Yeah.
But the fact is that
I can because I've read the paper.
All right, SWAT. In selected samples, patients with a psychiatric disorder...
That's a bad choice of words.
Yes. Refugees and students, so refugees, prevalence rates were nearly 4 times higher. So they discovered that you would experience a incubus at a frequency of 4 times higher if you're a refugee.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And
so that again ties it into this idea of trauma and PTSD, possibly.
Absolutely right. Yes.
Or alienation, even, not that does tie in with those themes of potential trauma. I guess it depends why they're a refugee, but potential trauma and PTSD as well.
Correct. And here's a very standout sentence from the paper. Based on the condition's robust clinical presentation and the relatively high prevalence rates, we advocate inclusion of the incubus phenomena as a diagnostic category in major classifications. Basically, it's a real medical thing.
Right. It's interesting. The other thing that struck me, going back to your son's phenomena, the first phenomena we were talking about, is how do they know that they were asleep when they died?
It was reported by their relatives.
Fine.
Their wife was asleep next to them, for example.
So there's not a medical way of knowing, but it's more witness statements saying they were asleep. Got you.
Yes. And just before we put the incubus to bed, this they quote a specific case in here. And I reckon if you've got young people, you've probably already turned off. This is, but this sort of shows you, this I think is very similar to what we're saying. The sort of the guilt and PTSD in some of these refugees it's a bit like this. 45-year-old female presented with a history of strange sexual experiences occurring during sleep for the past 4 years. Having separated from her husband, she'd been living alone for the past 14 years. Initially, she reported of somebody having sexual intercourse with her every night during sleep. She woke up in fear about 1 hour after falling asleep, and to her surprise, no one was about. She clearly described feeling the pressure of someone lying on her and the to and fro motion of phallus and vagina. Due to disturbed sleep at night, she tried sleeping during daytime, but these symptoms endured nearly every day. She spent a huge amount of money on visiting faith healers and even changed her religion to stop them, but it was in vain. She remained preoccupied and distressed with these beliefs throughout the day. To relieve this distress, she self-medicated with over-the-counter sedative hypnotic agents, but to no avail. Probing further, unfortunate use of the language, she was convinced that it was a deceased spirit who was indulging in sexual acts with her. She described the deceased as a deceased Asian young guy who, during his brief stay in her home, had made sexual advances towards her during multiple times, and hence had to be sent back to his parents. A few months later, she had heard he'd committed suicide. The reason was unknown, but no one blamed her for it, despite the guilt she felt and responsibility for his death. The symptoms started a week after his death. They go on to explain that this is the cause of her, of what is happening here.
So again, trauma, post-traumatic stress,
Trauma,
guilt,
post-traumatic stress.
extreme guilt. Yeah.
But she is not just experiencing this in sleep. Medically, it's like she's had sex when they examine her. So medically, these people dreamt they died, and they did. That's where I see the similarity.
Right, because the body, which goes back to that theory, your body acting out what you're dreaming. Yeah, and that kind of ties in. Yeah, I get how that ties in with the sleep paralysis. The other thing I was thinking while you were describing that is, I can see the Wes Craven Nightmare on Elm Street influences in some of the stuff you just talked about. The way she tried to stop it happening, sleeping during the daytime. You know what I mean? I think of those scenes in A Nightmare on Elm Street where they're so tired they end up sleeping in the daytime, but it doesn't help. Or, taking... I'm sure there's scenes with taking sedatives and stuff, either to stop the dreams or, they get given them by their parents so they can sleep. Yeah, those themes, you can see where that all came in to the construction of A Nightmare on Elm Street. That's interesting.
Yeah. Freddy Krueger, by the way, didn't kill as many people as you think he did.
In the movies?
In the movies, yeah. In real life, he killed nobody. Because this came up at Halloween quizzes. He killed 69 people.
Okay.
Which
over the in the first movie or across the series?
Across all of them.
Ooh, including New Nightmare. Sorry.
No, the Rob Englund series.
Okay, yeah.
Highest kill rate for a serial killer in a horror movie is Pinhead. Right. And don't ask me how many people it was because I forgot. It was 300 and something.
Right, Clive Barker. Hey.
Hellraiser. Yes. He gets the high kill he gets the high kill count.
It's easy for you to say.
Thank you, man. Back to where we're. So basically, this whole thing is still essentially a complete mystery, but it has been explained away through various reasons. But none of them are particularly satisfactory. The most likely thing is that there was a congenital heart disease that wasn't picked up because doctors didn't know what they were looking for. Then when they did find it, they couldn't work out how that had killed them so quickly. But the stress and trauma of everything they'd been through appears to have contributed to it. But there are other things. A change in diet, having a terrible diet, because if you're a refugee, you've got a terrible diet. It could be an allergy. It could be many, many, many different things. Yeah. But the chances that a demon killed you in your sleep are not zero.
Wow. That's fascinating. And I really didn't know that connection with Wes Craven, kind of that influencing what's happening. I think what's really interesting, and I think it was really good that you brought the succubus into it and sleep paralysis, because that power of your body's physical reaction to a dream, that's kind of the theme of it, and the potential that a dream can be so terrifying that it can create something in your body that does that is it's scary and amazing. I mean, it's funny though, even as I was saying the words, it's interesting how, because I guess we get paralyzed to sleep and not act out our dreams, almost mentally I was talking about the body as being something separate when I dream. That was do you know what I mean? In those last few sentences, it was like, oh, I'm amazed that, actually, if you think about it, is that me saying, I'm amazed that my brain has some control over my body. But there's something about sleep where it's such a separate experience that you almost detach yourself from your body, both physically and mentally, that you know, I'm not really being clear, but you know what I'm saying.
It's a magical experience that we have every day.
Yeah.
That we forget how magical it is.
Yeah.
This whole thing was inspired when I was a week and a bit ago. I was sort of looking through, to use James's term, my dusty old tomes, thinking, I wonder what I will pick on next to cover. And my girlfriend, who we'd been up for many hours, it was the mid-afternoon, and I said, "You all right? You don't look right." She said, "I'll be honest, I had the worst dream I've ever had last night." I said, what happened? She said, I died in it. And I said, oh, God, that sounds horrible. She said, yeah, there was something collapsed on the house and I was buried. I was buried alive, and I really felt what it was like to be buried alive. And I said, oh, God, I'm really sorry. And she was visibly shaken all day.
Right.
And that made me think, gosh, I've heard of this playground rumour. And then I discovered the Wes Craven thing, and then it all suddenly came together.
Yeah.
And I know we are usually err on the comedic, and I did think twice, but I thought it's worth
really
covering.
Fascinating. Really fascinating.
But this in no way denigrates the appalling things that happened to those refugees or our servicemen and women from the different countries that attempted to help them. So I don't wish to undermine any of those memories.
No, definitely. But I think it's really interesting. I also like the fact that you're right. I remember that thing of, if you die in your sleep, then you die. And it sounds like we've disproved that. But there is some debate about how this ties in with this extreme trauma, with post-traumatic stress and the effects on the body, both in terms of whether it's sleep paralysis or this SUNS. Is that how you described it?
SUNS, SUNDS.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And with all of the sad things, the other thing that inspired me was the death of Matthew Perry, which is
very sad.
Terribly, terribly sad. And as we record this, we still don't know how he died. And it's a private thing, really. But, sometimes death can be mysterious.
Yeah, especially when it's about ahead of when it should have been.
Exactly. Could I have been more any sincere? No, hang on, I'll do it again. Could I have been more sincere? That's my little wave to Matthew Perry. Now, this week I've had to put some time aside because you've been teaching me your skill.
Yes. Now, because I've got a TQM Tulpa project, so anyone who's new to the podcast, it's this thing we've done of trying to think about, get people to think about Sherlock Holmes with the intention of making the fictional character of Sherlock Holmes into a real person. We call it the TQM Tulpa project. Normally, Ben kind of reads these out and I play the violin, but I thought that was a bit unfair on him. So I've spent all week training Ben to play the violin theme tune to the Tulpa project.
Right.
You waxed your bow?
I've waxed my bow. In fact, I had an incubus do it for me. No, I've waxed my bow. I've got my horsehair out.
Yep.
I think that's what that is.
Yep.
I've cleaned my chin.
Yep.
So let's get it going.
Right. Let's hear the first few notes, Ben.
Here we go.
Not bad. I think, we can work on adding a little more tonal refrain, but I like the way you're going with it.
Yeah, I was thinking about more tonal refrains.
Yes, well, we've had, we had a good Tulpa last week, didn't we? We had a kind of ghostly sighting, possibly. We've also had one, this is us going through some of the ones we've had. So Tony Lovell sent in, after listening to our episode that we did on the CIA, he says, minutes after listening to this episode, I got this note from my friend. So the message he got from his friend was, when I was 17, I wrote a story that had an electronic Sherlock Holmes known as the Holmes device. That's
a good idea for a story.
It's a great idea, isn't it? He said, later in real life, the police would call their major computer Holmes.
Oh, yeah, of course they do, yeah.
And with a cop smoking an electric cigarette. I don't remember that bit. But
no, I don't.
His friend says, sadly, my writing was awful and it has long been lost in time. But it's funny what you can get right. So his friend sent Tony that message minutes after he'd stopped listening to the podcast and heard our TQM Tulpa projects.
Oh, weird. I love stuff like that.
He then sent me this photo still not knowing about the podcast. So he sent a picture of some books, including a Sherlock Holmes book to Tony. So, yes, Tony, without any kind of mention, we just finished talking about Sherlock Holmes. His friend suddenly tells him this random story about a Sherlock Holmes thing that he'd done when he was a kid and sent him a picture of a Sherlock Holmes book.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Well, it gets even weirder.
Oh, what?
So Tony then said, "It's really weird. While I post this photo, someone mentioned Sherlock on the radio as I press send."
Wow. Tony, you've been doing some hard imagining.
Yeah. He said, "I know it all sounds like a joke, but it's not."
Well, that's the thing. It often sounds like a joke, but it's not. As we sat down to record, friend of the show, Kath, got in touch. "I've just seen a chap in a deer stalker," she said with exclamation marks. Yes.
No way.
We were speculating last week whether we would have any Sherlock Holmeses turn up during Halloween. Yeah.
But Halloween's way over. So, wow, that's good. I'm taking that as that's as close to a real sighting. We'll have to get more detail out of her.
I will do.
Did he look like Sherlock? Because remember, everybody kind of goes for the movie type Sherlocks, but the early Sherlock, certainly the early drawn, very distinctive, kind of big hook nose, the kind of older gentleman, So yeah, I guess that means we can cover anything. Anybody in a deerstalker hat,
a
looks
man
like Sherlock
or a woman.
Holmes.
Yes. Yeah, very progressive Sherlock Holmes. It was a woman in a skirt. Well, that's probably what Holmes would have worn. No, we're not going that far.
That's Enola Holmes.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Oh, that was quite good.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Brilliant. Well, look, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you like what we do, subscribe wherever you kind of get to us, or leave us a little review. Always helps. If you really like what we do, go to patreon.com and join us there. So patreon.com/TQM pod.
Thank you very much. I really like what you do. I'll go onto Patreon for you.
Excellent. All right. Now you've made me afraid to dream, but I'll try and get a good night's sleep.
I tell you what, we're nothing if not eclectic on this show.
That is true.
Right. Well, we'll see you next week for something completely different.
Yes. Cool. See you next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?